Thank you. Welcome back from lunch, and we were allowed a few minutes extra because unfortunately we were not able to make contact with Peter Shepherd, but we are going to make a start now to the afternoon session. Thank you for those of you who over lunch contributed to the wall at the back there with some ideas. That's very helpful. So this afternoon, and I say this with a sense of deja vu, Chris Harmston is going to lead a discussion with David Hammer, our clinical microbiologist, Professors Ian Bissett and John Windsor, and also Terry Ann Clark, who you met earlier this morning. And the topic for the discussion, which Chris is going to lead, essentially is around developing capacity here in Tokoro. Be a little bit gentle with Chris, as he and I were walking down the hill this morning. Sorry? Oh, I'll just talk a little bit louder. I'm just asking you to be a little bit gentle with Chris, who's leading the discussion, because he was a little bit nervous this morning. He said that when he normally at conferences, he speaks loudly and very authoritatively, and that works to frighten everybody so they don't ask any questions. But that's not going to work today because this group is far too bold to be frightened. So Chris and Ian, John, if you could come up, I'd be very grateful.
Hi everyone. Wynne, thanks for giving us the session after lunch. Really appreciate that. So this session is about what do people in Tokoro need and how can the university help. And I'm really privileged to have some great people here sat at the front. And I want to take this as an opportunity for us to have an interactive discussion between ourselves and hopefully with you as well. And I think when I thought about this, there was three aims that I thought about this session. The first is, it'd be really useful, I think, for all of us to have an insight into how the university is organised and how research in the university is organised, because quite often we have a perception of how things work in the university, and I don't think that's always reality. The second thing is, I think it'd be really good for us to understand what is actually available at the university and what the university actually thinks they can provide for us. And the third thing that I think is important is knowing what we can offer the university and how we can collaborate, because I think there's lots more work that can be done there. So we're just going to cover off 4 areas today in terms of what we need and what the university can help us with. We're going to have a chat about resource, we'll have a chat about expertise, talk hopefully a little bit about what we think our outputs and our outcomes should be, and then we'll talk about the future. And there'll be a few talks from our other panel members in between. But first of all, I'd just like to go across and introduce ourselves and just talk a little bit about how we got to this point and what our role is in research. So my name's Chris Harmston, I'm a general surgeon, and I work here in Whangarei, and I've worked here for the past 2 years. And previously I worked in a reasonably sized university hospital in Coventry in the UK, so we had 1,200 beds and we had a pretty big research unit. And I would describe myself as a researcher with a small r. So I did research, but it was a small part of my job. And when I came to Northland, it was clear to me that there was a huge enthusiasm, a capacity, and actually an unmet need for looking at our local community and investigating them. And I'm really pleased that we've had some great people who are junior staff, especially Brody and Mike, who've come through our department, who've been able to help us fulfill and get to where we want to go. So that's why I'm stood here today. We did have a discussion about who should lead the panel, and it was decided it would either be the youngest or the best looking person. So I'll leave you to decide what criteria we used. So I'll just hand over, if I hand the mic down and if everyone can just introduce themselves, that would be great.
Tēnā koutou katoa, my name's David Hammer, and as Chris mentioned, I'm the clinical microbiologist for the DHB, although I go by a variety of other names, usually just after I've denied access to restricted antimicrobials to my colleagues. I have a strong interest in epidemiology, and I'll talk a bit about how I got more into it during my presentation. But that's my particular passion in life is epidemiology. So I'll come across.
Thanks, David. I'm John Windsor, and I guess my first link's with Northland, where when I met my wife, she grew up in Rawene, and her father was the superintendent in Rawene for 12 years, Jack Gray. So we had lots of holidays, family holidays in Hokianga, which means a lot to me. We've now bought in Tutukaka to retire, so I really do feel I'm coming home to Northland. It's actually where we had our honeymoon as well. So in terms of contributing here, I think I'm really going to look forward to hearing more of the good stuff that's happening here, and we'll try and plug some comments back about how we can support. I'm a surgeon, started off as a general surgeon, became an HPB surgeon, then became an HPB upper GI surgeon, then became a pancreatic surgeon, and now in fact I don't do major surgery, I concentrate almost fully on research. So I'm very passionate about combining research and clinical practice, and the interface between those two. How can you do it? How can you make it happen? So hope to contribute later.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Ian Bissett. I'm the head of surgery in the University of Auckland. I'm also a surgeon, a colorectal surgeon. I have a fairly long history in surgery, and really my consultant years started in Nepal, and I spent about 11 years working there and have a bit of an understanding about poor resources and trying to get around that issue. I came back to New Zealand with my family. I have 3 children. My wife's a teacher. My children have all got partners, and I also have 2 grandchildren now. And in fact, they're living back in Nepal again. So my interest in research goes right back to my training. Research opportunities were difficult in Nepal, but there were still things that we could do. And then, since coming back to New Zealand and my involvement with the university, the opportunities have been really beginning with identifying people who can work with you. And I'll talk a little bit about how to engage students a bit later on. So thank you. What can the university offer you? I would say, first of all, we want to hear from you. We can offer you ears, so we would love to hear. And I think we've heard a lot already this morning. Thanks.
Kia ora koutou, TC. I am not part of the blue shirt brigade. And I'm a nurse, and I call myself a reluctant researcher. I started doing research over 20 years ago now because I wanted to advocate really well for Māori young people. And when I first started working in youth health nursing, there were no specific youth health services. And everyone said, but you know, this is the healthiest time of your life, why do we need youth health services? And yet that wasn't what I was seeing clinically. And I realised that we needed really good information to advocate for good services. And so that began my journey. And really important to sort of acknowledge all the mentors along the way who supported me to do that. Mostly my research has been in the child and youth area, sexual health, mental health, with a real focus on equity and Māori health, and you know, and how I did a Masters in Public Health, and then I did a PhD at the University of Minnesota in the United States, working with some of the world experts in my area. And so I've been really blessed to have lots of great mentors and researchers who have pushed me and made me learn statistical modelling, as well as sort of opened my eyes to the power of research to be able to change things and influence things. So I come to research as an advocate, and I see it as a powerful advocacy tool, and so yeah, that's my perspective. Kia ora.
Have we got another mic?
Fantastic. I want to ask everybody a question just before we move on. How many people have an association with the university, i.e. an honorary contract, or already have a contract with the university? So back 50%, 40%. Okay, because, and this is the time to ask for what you want, by the way. Because we've got some important people in the room. One of the things that we haven't talked about so far is actually what the university already offers us. And I'm really just keen to hear from the people from the university, and then David, I'll have a chat with you afterwards, just about how we access some of the resources that are already available from the university. And the first question I want to ask is about honorary posts, and who can apply for an honorary post at the university, what the criteria are, and how many honorary posts are available, and just your views on that.
I'll take that question because I'm always looking for honoraries. So what's required is that you need to be involved in either research associated with the university or teaching of our students. And we have in the Department of Surgery about 100 honoraries, and we're quite happy to have 200. If you're involved in teaching our students or involved in research with us, what you need to do though is to say you want to be an honorary and send your CV. That's the two things. Most of the posts are 3-year fixed-term posts. There is no money associated with it, but there is access to university resources, and particularly the library and online access to a lot of things you otherwise wouldn't get access to. So there's no major hurdle as long as you're involved with the university in some way.
Okay, and Ian, you may not know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it. Does that include nursing, allied health, or are you just talking about doctors?
I can answer that. It does include nursing.
It does include those, yeah.
And the fixed term is renewable, isn't it? So
Yes.
after
So
a year, you send your CV in again.
yeah, we need a new CV at 3 years. That's exactly right. And as long as you're continuing to be involved with students or research, you continue that in that.
Yeah, I'm Christopher Goodyear-Smith, Head of General Practice, and any GP who is involved in supervising our students on placements, but also nurses, any practice nurse who's involved, I'm really happy to offer an honorary to. So we have several hundred honoraries for nurses and GPs out in the community.
So there's no reason why anybody who's involved in teaching students or in research shouldn't apply for an honorary position.
Absolutely.
And that leads on to my second question. So I'll ask David and then anyone else who's got an honorary position. Ian, you just mentioned a little bit about the resources that come with an honorary position. You mentioned the library, which is fantastic. I probably use it every other day. But David, have you used any of the resources from your honorary position?
Not really. I've been an honorary lecturer for about 3 or 4 years, so I'm probably overdue sending in another CV. No, Chris was just showing me a few of the features the other day, and I was blown away with what's actually on offer. And probably it's mostly my own fault. I haven't sat down and explored what's on offer. I run a fairly busy service in the hospital, but it is quite amazing what actually you can get as an honorary lecturer in terms of in vivo library access, and of course the kind of absolute golden ticket of possibility of an interview with a biostatistician.
We all know that Ian's got one who lives in his spare room.
Yeah, of course.
So just of those of you who put your hands up who work up in Northland who've got an honorary position, who's accessed the university library or downloaded the software that comes with it? So probably a few less. I think the resources that the university already offer for honorary posts are amazing. You can get EndNote, Microsoft Office, you can get an operating system, and you can get other software in Vivo, SPSS, and it's really amazing.
I would say I've been an honorary lecturer, and in my term expired and I had to resubmit and all the rest of it. And in that first 3 years, it was fantastic getting into the library, and I used it all the time. And this next thing, it's been terrible trying to get back into the library. So the HR system at the university somehow is not a smooth transition from one contract to another, and I have found that extraordinarily frustrating, but that's just my personal experience and may not be universal, although you're nodding over here. Shall I pass the baton? Oh, no. No? Yeah, you're with me on that.
I kind of see an honorary position as just formalising a relationship, and I wonder whether we ought to make comments about the relationship. I mean, in order to become an honorary, you've got to send a letter to the relevant head of department, but that's the opening of a conversation which I think should continue about, where would you like to be contributing more, what are your needs? And it's not just about accessing online material, it's accessing people who are there to try and help you as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I think once you get an honorary post, you definitely feel closer to the university, and you should feel like you have access to the university. My understanding is the same of an honorary post, is that it starts that conversation and it allows you we access to the university. And that's the other thing I want to just talk to you about is, what about people who haven't got honorary posts? Are you happy for them to? Well, I think you've answered my question and said that almost everybody should have an honorary post. But how do we access the university if we haven't got an honorary post? Are you happy for young researchers to approach you, to email you, to talk to the university? How would you like all the people in this room who've got these ideas to actually get in touch with you? We talked about starting the conversation. That's easy, but how do we interact with you on a practical level? I'll start with TC.
I'm a little bit reluctant to answer that question because I work 2 days a week and I already have a cajillion emails. But one of the things that I think is really important is being a bit brave and kind of identifying who you want to work with, who your mentors might be. And if you don't know who they are, in the University of Auckland, you can go in and you can search the faculty by topic. So if you have a specific topic, you can go in and you can Google and you can put in your search terms and find who are the faculty who are working in that area. And usually if you email them, they'll get back to you eventually. And I sort of say that with aroha, is that we often are pulled in lots of directions, but we do eventually get back to people. And some of my most interesting, and I know the people have talked about this, some of my most productive and most interesting collaborations have happened from really random emails. People sending me stuff and kind of going, hey TC, are you interested in this? And if I can't or I don't have capacity, I'll say, not right at this moment, but I'm going to CC in somebody else who I think might be really interested in this. And just getting that foot in the door and getting those emails happening usually really is really good way to do it. Yeah?
So there were two people who are having trouble renewing their honorary situation. The 3-year term comes to an end, and that for me as a head of department there isn't a trigger that says this person's now finished. And so what you find is you try and get in and you can't get in because your sort of time expired. But it isn't difficult to restart you, but you do have to contact the head of department.
I think we've gone down that route.
Yeah.
So we can deal with that offline. But, yeah.
Some departments are different. Some departments are great, like surgery. Other departments are a bit more.
So the people who are willing to expand their department, like me, it's pretty easy.
Some are more protective.
Okay.
Just in terms of accessing people in the university, I think Brynderwyns seems quite a high mountain range sometimes. The university seems highly complex, but clearly TC's talked about accessing personnel through the computer. But again, we've come up here really because we cherish, covet, anticipate relationships with you guys. So if you feel that any of us are better looking or younger than Chris, come and talk to us.
Thanks. TC, I think you raised a really important point, which we haven't quite touched on. I think research is really hard. And I think actually doing meaningful research is even harder, and you have to be interested in it. And one of the real keys is finding somebody who's interested in what you want to do. It's almost impossible, I think, to do research that you're not interested in. You have to have a passion for it, and it has to be something that you're interested in. So don't take on projects in an area that you're not interested in. Take on projects in an area that you're passionate about, and then find somebody else in the university who shares that passion, and then it starts to work. I just want to ask you quickly about higher degrees, if that's possible. And when I talk about higher degrees, I'm talking about degrees for junior researchers, because in the surgical unit and the medical unit, one of the perceptions we have, which may or may not be true, is that the juniors feel as if to get a piece of work recognised, they have to be in a larger institution. And I'm just interested in your thoughts about whether we can take junior researchers and take them through that process in Northland, and what kind of pathways you think are available for that. So John, it looks like...
Just love to respond to that. I think, Ian, you're going to talk about the different types of degrees, so I'll leave that. But in terms of can it be done in Northland, I think absolutely. I think one of the issues that I think came up some in discussion this morning, but sometimes there's a potentially a lack of confidence on the supervisor's side about what is actually required of the university and what do the students require of me, and I don't have much experience with it. So I just wanted to say one of the models that has worked really well for us, because we can't be experts in everything as a supervisor, is to use a co-supervision model. And I think as a busy clinician with your house officers sort of battering down your door wanting to do research, it's really difficult to sort of comprehend how you could take them all on. But I think if you judiciously select co-supervisors who may be non-clinicians, might be in the lab, might be down at the university, I think a co-supervision model might well be really helpful here, so that there's a three-way conversation, and with Zoom and others you can actually have a very meaningful regular meeting. So co-supervision, I think, could make it possible to get over that confidence hurdle that might exist for supervisors here, and we would like to offer that.
You put my slide.
Next slide, yeah, absolutely.
There are opportunities that are already here with the students that you have. So if you want to...
Come on.
Come in?
Yeah, do you want this as well?
What the slide advance?
Click it.
Cool.
Okay.
And it will be there.
I can work out how to use it.
It's coming up in about 2 seconds.
So you have year 5 and year 6 students here in Northland, and in year 5 they have a period of option which could be used for a research project, and year 6 there are also two opportunities they could use to do research. So let's just... Did I do it the wrong way?
I'll do it for you if you want. I can
There
say
you
there you go.
So there's a selective of 5 weeks. So there are only certain sorts of research you can do in a very short period of time, like 5 weeks or 3 weeks. That would usually be something that is retrospective and related to a chart review or an audit. But some of those, you may have something you really want done and you just haven't had time to do, and you have a student who wants to do it. Then you could use that as a selective for a 5th year student and say, these are the patients I really want to look at. I've done X, such and such. And that actually gets the student started on something. In year 6, there is an 8-week elective. There is also a 11-week research project, which is taking their cohort option and their elective together to do a research project. That is a great opportunity. That gives them a much bigger chunk of time to be able to do something. And in that time, a systematic review could be performed, provided you got involved with the student right even before they started their time, so they're getting ready to do that. You could do a postal questionnaire on a particular subject, and get your answer back within an 11-week period like that. So that's the sort of thing that could already happen with the students that are here. So that's undergraduates. There is another research program, which is the honours program, and that can happen. It happens at two points mostly in the curriculum, either after year 3 and before year 4, or after year 5 and before year 6, and it is a year of research. Students have had to have done well academically up to the point where they apply for that to be accepted in that. There will need to be a university person who is involved in their supervision, and that's not just an honorary. So there would need to be a co-supervisor or supervisor that you co-supervise within the university. Now that could be someone in Auckland, that could be someone here in Northland. Each year there are between 20 and 25 students who do an honours year, so it's a big resource. And you know, if there's a student that you work with in year 5 and they're wanting to do an honours degree, that is a great opportunity to get a really big project that they can do. And a student, if they've done their honours, can actually go on to do a PhD following that. So it is an entry point into a PhD. The other postgraduate degrees that can be done is a Master of Medical Science and a PhD. And an MD, of course. Again, there needs to be a supervisor who has a university contract. But that could be, their major supervision could actually happen with an honorary who is involved with the university in that sense and has some oversight from someone from within the university. The master's degree is also an entry into a PhD, and so there are some students we have who will begin their masters, get halfway through the year and say, actually I really want to do a PhD, and they can convert to a PhD partway through the first year, and that first year is counted as part of their PhD, provided they've shown that the project is big enough to be a PhD and they've made good progress over that period of time. And usually that's not too difficult to get through the university. We've had several students who've done that. This gives you a bit of a timeline for a master's. So I use this for students who are saying, you know, I think I might want to do a master's. They need to find a supervisor about 6 months before they're going to start. Read around the topic, begin their ethics and start submitting some things before they actually start the master's if they're going to really hit the ground running. And this runs through the sorts of things that you may do in a master's, including a systematic review and a clinical study. That would normally be the sorts of things we would do in the surgical realm. And what are the benefits? Well, there's a huge number of benefits which I could go into, but if you decide to do a degree like an honours or a master's, you, for the first time in your life, really have time to actually sit down and think. Think about a question, think about how to do it, and time to actually do the study yourself. And the huge amount of interactions that you have with people are really beneficial to what happens from then on in terms of the decision making you may be doing in terms of your longer term career. For those who want to get into training, it's a really big step forward in terms of competing against others if you've got a postgraduate degree. Clearly publications and networking with other researchers. So those are some of the things. I won't go, I think we'll stop at that point, rather than showing all these other. So our master's students have had several publications from the year in doing their masters, and many of them have gone on to do a PhD.
Are you talking about full-time or part-time students?
You can do both. If you do a part-time, it takes twice as long. It's usually you're enrolled half-time. It's quite difficult to do a part-time degree if you're trying to do full-time clinical work, which some people try to do. I would recommend strongly against trying to do that. Particularly, if you're in a busy training scheme, it's a recipe for frustration for both the supervisor and the student. So, at least getting started full time is very helpful.
And I would say that for most masters in nursing people as well, most of us worked full time and studied full time, and it is really, really difficult and incredibly challenging. People survive it, but it's often not a good experience for the supervisor or the student.
I'm a new DHB employee, just returned home to New Zealand from Australia. I've got a PhD in rural and remote general practice, but a Masters of Public Health and Tropical Medicine. One of the things I'm interested in is being able to potentially offer projects that I'm working on that may be suitable for students to do either electives or honours level. I've supervised students, a lot of students, including PhD students in Australia, so I'd be really interested to continue my ability to do that here. And I'm wondering, is there a way we can put forward potential projects with support from the university to identify a university co-supervisor that would work with me and a student that might want to work on the project?
I was just talking at a national meeting last Friday about this. We really came down to the fact that we need some kind of speed dating or matching process, don't we? Where you need to find some students for particular projects where you can post your projects and people can also say what they're looking for. So I think Sally Mary talked about a hub this morning. It just seems to me, I'm not sure if you're linked with the university at the moment, but clearly to supervise your students, you should come and talk to somebody in the university about that. That would be good. But I think that following on from Sally's comment earlier, it seems to me that if there isn't a research hub or research office in this DHB, it might well be something we need to look at in order, maybe co-funded or something. A person there who actually is well enough aware of what's happening in Northland with research, but also is linked with the university, can actually provide that matching or linkage, which has come up repeatedly this morning.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that I think we've just, I guess, two ideas or two thoughts that we've actually got. One is that for somebody like you, I've sometimes done a very small fractional appointment to allow for supervision, so it becomes contracted time, and we're often short of PhD supervisors. So that's actually a plus, and if you've already got that, if you've actually got that experience, then that's really good. And then that allows you also to co-supervise with people who've got a sort of bigger appointment. And so I think we should probably be thinking about creating some capacity in that degree. And the other thing was just to go back to the PhD and just to let people know that the HRC has clinical fellowships for the specific purpose of doing a PhD, where you get matched clinical time for study time. It's designed for clinicians. And we've actually just got somebody applying for that from the Waikato. And I guess the third thing is that I've supervised people with supervisors from other centres, including in the South Island, and where they've been in Tauranga or in the middle of the Waikato, and it's gone fine. We have face-to-face appointments sometimes. Zoom is great. The phone's pretty good too, so it's all doable.
I've got a student at the moment living in the Middle East. Zoom is awesome.
Yeah, Zoom's good.
Sorry, I'm Martin Conley. I'm head of geriatrics at the University, geriatrician at Wellington as well. I was going to make the same point to Sally about the very small percentages of appointments. They may be as small as 1/20th, i.e. 2 hours a week. Obviously, we think that 1/20th is a lot less than, 2 hours a week is a lot less than 1/20th of what will actually work, but that's what the university counts it as. And just going back a couple of steps, back to what we were talking about the library access before. The other thing to be aware of is that the library access doesn't only give you the online stuff, it also gives you the physical access, which may be by Zoom, to librarians. And if you're wanting to do a literature search, for example,
librarians, and you've no idea where to start, the librarians will take you through that step by step, or take your student through that step by step, and it's a great resource.
So that's to access the library for research. One has to belong to the university.
Or to be an honorary gives you that
Or
access.
to any, okay. Or a
And don't forget, there's a great library already in the hospital, and the librarians will help you out with your reviews and getting all your papers here as well. It's a really great untapped resource. But it's brought us perfectly onto the next thing that's written on my piece of paper, which is time. I counted how many times time was mentioned this morning, and I stopped. And I think it's really interesting. I just want to take your opinion, David, about how you balance your clinical time with doing research, and then I'd be interested in the other members of the panel just having a think about how much time do you think we need to, if we're going to supervise people doing pieces of research. So David.
Thanks, Chris. Time is certainly a very precious resource. I think the way I balance it is I've got 12,000 unread emails in my inbox. But yeah, clinical pressures are pretty big for most of the clinicians in this DHB. Most of us work over hours, but I think you do have to just find a way of prioritising at least small research projects. I recently had a selective student up, and she did an audit for me that I've been dying to do for the last 3 years. It was really awesome to just be able to say, this is what I want you to do, go away and do it, and supervise, but she basically did all the work. So having students is sometimes a great time saver in terms of getting the research done that you just don't have time to do personally.
I'm not sure that we're the best ones to talk to, because I think Einstein said if you're passionate about what you do, you don't work a day in your life. So I work 7 days a week because I love it. I love what we do. So the real question I think that you're asking, Chris, is how much time do you need to actually supervise somebody? I think if you haven't done it very often, it's going to take you a lot more time. If you co-supervise with somebody who's experienced, it's going to be a lot more efficient for you. I might show later today what I found extremely helpful in developing what's called a living agenda, which contains in a single document exactly where the student's at. They can put their questions, they can put their new ideas down, they can track their publications, and it's just a living document that they bring to me when we have a face-to-face meeting. So if the student's struggling, it might be a weekly meeting. If they're really at a more independent stage, it might just be a monthly meeting and some emails in between. But there's clearly some intensive time, which is at the beginning when you're trying to craft the proposal, get the funding, get their contracted time if you need to. That takes quite a bit of effort. But then once it's up and running, it should run smoothly. And then at the end, of course, when you've got write-up stage, there's a lot more time involved in that too. It's very difficult to give you how many hours per week, but it's rewarding.
Kim, did you want to? You do.
Yeah. I was just going to say, one of the things that I always say to people who are contacting me for potential supervision is interview your supervisors. And co-supervision is really important because you might have the content expert, but they might be really bad at the methodology and the writing. And so try to match what you need in a supervisor. Have the content expert, but also the person who's going to kind of keep you going along the process, and I think that that's really important. I do think you need to be able to get on with that person. I always am really clear with people about expectations. I've had a number of students who will be like radio silence, and then suddenly they contact you and they go, here, and they want you to give you feedback in like 2 days, reading, 60 pages. And so it's a little bit about having expectations, making sure that you've got regular meetings so that, there aren't any big surprises, recognising that there's going to be chunks of time when you are going to be needed more. So like, for instance, around ethics proposals, and leaving sufficient time for that. My master's student back there, who I buggered up her ethics application recently, and then around when you're getting close to submitting, because actually that's when you and your supervisor have a really intimate love-hate relationship, because they will keep giving you feedback to do, and you'll be like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. So, so just recognising that there are sort of, there's going to be ups and then there's going to be downs. There's going to be times where you're going to need lots of work, and then there's times where you're not going to hear from them. Yeah.
My least favourite thing is reducing the volume of people's work to get them submitted to journals. Whereas Brodie, you'll know what I'm talking about. And that, if we can just move on from resource a little bit and talk about expertise, I think that brings us quite nicely onto it, because I think we accept that we're probably on the beginning of our journey in Northland about building research capacity, although there's people doing great work. So just two things again. David, I'm just really interested in what got you started on the pathway with research and being interested in epidemiology. And then from the other members of the panel, what do you think is an appropriate starting point for us? And specifically maybe in surgery, what sort of studies should we be doing? And what are your thoughts around really well-designed clinical audit and collaborative audit? Do you think that fits under the research umbrella, or do you think it's something completely separate? So David first, and if you can just hold those thoughts, and then we'll come to you.
Thanks, Chris. I can rabbit on for hours, but basically in the microbiological field we're facing a disaster of proportions equivalent to global climate change in terms of the antimicrobial resistance that's creeping around the world, which obviously feeds very quickly into epidemiology. And certainly working as a clinician, you come to the conclusion that you can keep treating patients individually, or you can try and address what the source of the problem is upstream and fix it. So I've had an interest in epidemiology for a long time. I'll come into my actual training in my presentation. The other thing I like about epidemiology is it's really cheap, because usually the data is all sitting there, just waiting to be harvested. So you can go out and do big projects, but often you can just mine the data that's there and utilise it to answer the questions, and actually answer questions using local data to solve local problems. That's what I really like about epidemiology.
Clearly there's a research continuum from, I don't need it, thanks. There's a research continuum from basic science, even blue skies research, through to outcomes, efficacy, health systems. And you know, in that continuum, if you were to ask me where the emphasis should be placed, it's not going to be in basic science in Northland, but it is going to be at efficacy outcomes. This picture is what I try to use when people say, what kind of research should I do? And you can see three columns there. On the left is, it's called laboratory, then there's patients, and then there's populations. And actually, the kind of studies are listed here, so that at the top there's a level 5, ones that generate level 5 evidence. And Chris was talking about our case reports, case series audits of value. Of course they're of value, and in fact that's one of the most important ways in which we generate hypotheses. They don't necessarily provide you with a definitive answer, but they're very, very important, and then they flow on to, as you see, hypothesis testing, and that may be in the lab, maybe in the clinic, it may be natural experiments in the community. But there's this wide spectrum of opportunity, and on there you have to ask yourself, where would our emphasis be? And if you're talking, Chris, about starting things, then you would start up the top about case reports and audit, but in growing your research spectrum of research, you want to actually move into the other areas as well. And collaboration with lab people here or in Auckland would be fine. Of course, you've got very strong community and public health expertise, including in the back corner, to tap into as well. So I would say that you want to be focusing in on efficacy of various therapies, on outcomes, on health services delivery, end of the spectrum.
Thanks, John. I think that's really useful, and I think it's really important that especially researchers starting off understand the importance of case reports, case series, and audit. For me, that's where you start, and then you just carry on the journey. And I really think that our niche in Northland is starting researchers off on their journey and progressing them through that, going from the bottom and moving them up through the top, and maybe then moving on to the university. Alan.
Thanks, John. And I'd just like to say again that there's another whole field, which is qualitative research, which fits into that in a sort of matrix fashion, and that gives often explanations about meaning or explores motivations or the origins of problems, and it can be of real value in identifying areas for improvement in clinical care, but also for identifying areas for other kinds of research. So just a little bit of a bugbear that we mustn't forget that big part of what's available, and often good for a place like this where the opportunities are huge.
I totally agree, and Ian mentioned it earlier on as well. Qualitative research and Northland, I think, go hand in hand. It's really, really important, and it's an area that I haven't got much skill in, but we really need as much support in qualitative research as we do in all other kinds of research. Which brings me nicely not onto statistics. And lots of people have talked about statistics help today. There's definitely a perception that if you work at the university that you just walk around down the corridor and get your statistics help. There's no doubt about that. So we're going to come the other way now, just like the members from the university, just to talk to us about how they access statistics help and what availability you actually have. And then David will just give us a little talk about what we're trying to do, what David's trying to do in Northland with setting up some statistics help.
From my perspective, I usually will have fostered a very strong relationship, usually with lots of chocolates and bribery and coffee, with some of our biostatistician friends. And I did my degree in public health, and I've worked largely with large population-based surveys, but you can never underestimate how important it is to have a biostatistician who can advise you on the best ways of doing things, even if you think you know, and also around designing the stuff. So I always make sure that I have good relationships with biostatisticians. I always write them into my grants so that they are an integral part of the team, not just as a consultant, and nurture the relationship. That's all I can say. Chocolate, coffee works.
We don't have statisticians coming out our ears. We have some within our department who have skills in statistics better than my skills, so I will take their advice. But I can't say strongly enough that you should start with the statistician, not just finish with the statistician, because the last thing that you want is to have the wrong data that you're trying to get an answer out of. So there is a resource that the university supplies for the School of Medicine, and that is an external statistician that comes one day a week, and you can get an appointment with that person.
That's at the Faculty of Medical Health Sciences across School of Nursing, Optometry.
And I would think, and one of the things I've put up there is perhaps we could arrange so that person, you could zoom in to that person. You'd have to make a booking and zoom in so that you could have an hour with that person to go through your study. Am I stepping out of line here, Ellen?
No.
I was just going to ask as well, sorry to interrupt you, but can you access that as an honorary lecturer?
I use contract researcher that I've worked with for many, many years because I actually find at the end of the day the service I get as head of the School of Medicine in statistical support is inadequate. But there is one. It's actually several statisticians that have up to now been based at Tamaki that are more recently meant to be covering the entire, probably faculty actually. I think that's right, isn't it? They're meant to be for the whole faculty.
Most of them have retired.
We think that they've had a little bit of geographical capture. I wouldn't wish to say something out of turn, but obviously it's easier for people who live at Tamaki to to get hold
Well,
of them.
except that most of them have retired, and
Well,
the new ones are not as available, and they're stretched
Well,
much
you
more
are, you
thinly.
see, so even you're finding this.
Yes, I
and
find
part of the problem is that the numbers of people that want this service vastly exceed the actual resource. But if you have a project that you're interested in, we should be able to make it a priority and that you do get some access to it. And I think that if nothing else, we have a range of people that have different levels of statistics. I'm sitting next to one of my main statistical supporters. He's not a statistician. He's working as a postdoc in our department. But there are lots of people with very strong statistics, and we should be able to help you to find it. And you would, as an honorary interested in doing research, we would see that as very important to support, particularly if you're from a remote site.
Good, I'm going to give the microphone to somebody who's an expert on statistics.
Okay, so as mentioned earlier, I'm the microbiologist for the hospital, but when I got my job a couple of years ago, I noticed at the bottom of it, on my job description, said, by the way, you're also the hospital epidemiologist. And I thought, I better do something about that then. So I've spent a couple of years doing a taught master's through the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and Epidemiology. And I've also done a couple of Stater online courses to teach me a little bit about statistics. And although I'm still definitely a tiny grasshopper in the world of statistics, I am capable of producing some pretty graphs. This was from my mini thesis of my master's, looking at distribution, age versus socio-ethnic class. This is purely in Maori, so it was socio-economic class of rheumatic fever. And this is a graph I composed the other day, which I'm going to probably go political with fairly soon, trying to promote vaccination for meningococcus, because we have a new nasty strain of meningococcus in the country, which we're not doing anything about. But as part of my MSc mini thesis, from the actual results, I learned that I had a null finding, bugger. And I also learned some interesting details about service provision in Northland, which we're still sort of following up on. But from actually doing the research, I discovered that here at the DHB we have an absolute goldmine of data. The trouble is it's very siloed and sometimes jealously guarded. You've actually got to go and break down the doors of a few departments to get access to the loot that they have in terms of the data. But when you do that, you can actually start to put different databases together and see a pattern that nobody's seen before. So that I found quite exciting. I also discovered that there are some people, often hiding in the shadows, who are very, very good at statistics in this organisation. They're just kept under wraps. And at the same time, I've discovered, well, I know that there are many of my colleagues, especially clinician colleagues, who are absolutely terrified by statistics and are seriously hampered by their stats ability. And if I can just share a brief story, a couple of years ago, one of my very respected surgical colleagues came to me and said, "Look, David, I've got this research project, but I'm absolutely flummoxed by the stats. Can you do the stats for me?" And I said, "Well, yes, I'm nobody's expert, but give it to me, I'll have a look at it." And she said, "Well, here's the research I've been doing, and by the way, in 2 weeks' time, I'm taking to present this in an international conference." Okay, well, no pressure. And she said, "Well, actually, I'm thinking of pulling out from the conference." I said, "Look, don't pull out. Let's just work over this for a day or two, and we'll sort it out." And we spent the weekend cleaning up the data, and then in the end, she only really needed a couple of t-tests and a few chi-squareds. And off she went to Europe to a oncoplastic surgical conference, and she won Best Speaker. So one of the things that told me is, A, it reinforced that we have a problem with the fear of statistics. I don't know if there's a statistics-phobia or some technical term for it in this DHB, but actually we're doing a lot of research that really is presentable on the world stage if we could just get it off the ground and into the light of day. And I know that a lot of projects die going down the dark alley of what should we do for statistical analysis. So I also wear an innovation and transformation hat, and as part of that I've recently been offered some executive assistant time, which is a wonderful resource. And if this project was left to me, it would also kind of die its death and it would be lost in the 12,000 emails that I haven't answered. But I developed a plan to change things using our executive assistant time. So we're in the process of gathering up all the volunteers who are able to do statistics and to formalise a process in this DHB so that anybody who does have a research idea can come and see us first before they start their research, and we can guide them into what their question really is, what data needs to be collected, and in what format so that we can actually analyse it meaningfully. and then we'll let them run off and do their research, and then if we're feeling really generous, we'll even run it through Stata or R or whatever we happen to use. So that's the current plan. We have the enthusiasm, which this has been embraced by, both on the receiving end, but also more so on the giving end. The people who actually want to volunteer has been absolutely amazing. I've been astounded at the willingness in this organisation for people who are working as clinicians or in management information systems or public health to come forward and say, count me in, I want to help people out. Because my idea is if we each just help out 3 or 4 people, and there are a dozen or so of us, we can get 40 or 50 projects off the ground each year. And that's the plan. So,
David, can we ring from Auckland?
I'm sure we can work out a pretty quid pro quo. We'll see how it goes. I mean, maybe we can go viral with this as a concept. So my questions are, how can we strengthen our statistical capability at DHB? So I think this is going to be a good start when we get it off the ground, and we're just getting it off the ground as a group. But we really are just a bunch of volunteers, and I think we can do a lot of basic stuff. We can do the t-test, chi-squared, even a bit of Poisson and regression analysis. But for the really complicated stuff, we are still going to need a biostatistician. How do we formalise a link so that we can say, well, we've given it our best shot. Can you now go and see somebody who really knows what they're talking about, go see the professionals? How can we boost our collective stability? Because obviously we're all of varying grades. We have a learning support crew on site here who do a lot of really good courses. They bring people up here to give short courses. Could we look at a collaboration between our learning module with the university to train up both our collective people helping, but also perhaps the people who are wanting to do research here and don't know their sort of P-test from their 95% confidence interval. And really, having done a master's, I didn't have time to go anywhere. I did it completely by distance, so it can be done. What sort of short courses are available for both staff and students, either on site here as a short course or by distance? So those are my questions. Thank you.
Great.
And that's how you get a biochemist to do your work for you. David, I think this is just absolutely fantastic. And I think it will really change people's view when they actually think about setting projects up. And that initial fear, was it Thomas who said earlier on about the fear of knowing whether you're good enough to do things, and actually right at the beginning knowing you're collecting the right thing is really, really important, because so many people start off collecting the wrong thing, realise after 100 hours of data input, and it just goes to the end of an Excel file somewhere on a shared drive. I think we can prevent all of that and have some really good outputs. And that's just my final topic. Are we allowed 5 more minutes? Is that okay? Is that, yeah. I think you get a sense that we want to do meaningful work for the people of Northland. And so bearing that in mind, what outputs do you think we should aim for? And also what outcomes in terms of the people that we're producing, especially junior staff, do you think we should be aiming for?
My first thought about research outputs is that in the university we focus on number of publications, your H-index, and how much money you bring in. But really what we want to focus on here in terms of research outputs is actually measuring meaningful impact. And that sometimes takes a long time, particularly in the public health sector, but clearly that's important. I think that if I was the CEO here, what kind of KPI would I be wanting to see out of this in the next 2 or 3 years? I'd want to see more supervisors of research, more projects, and I'd want to see written into the projects, how impact is going to be evaluated. I think that Ian's outlined very nicely the extraordinary opportunities there are to use the students that are here, and incredibly intelligent, enthusiastic people who've been selected to come here because they want to make a difference. And the scary thing is that if people don't pick up on that enthusiasm and that idealism, if you like, it gets blunted with time, And so giving our 5th and 6th year students meaningful opportunities to deal with real world problems with sound statistical support and maybe co-supervision from Auckland, I think that this is going to be an outstanding beginning, building on what's already fantastic research being done. So research outputs, people doing better and patients doing better. Yeah.
Great. We've almost used, well, we've used over our hour, but we haven't even come close to a surgical hour, so that makes me feel good. I just want to thank all the members of the panel who've sat up here today. I could keep chatting all day. I'm really, really grateful, and that's been really useful for me. I hope it's been useful for everybody else, so thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thanks. Just to reiterate, thanks to the panel and for their very helpful suggestions. And I think Wynn's concerned that this might possibly just end up as a talk fest. We're already well past that, and there's some really good, firm advice and concrete suggestions as to things that we can do. Having talked about support that we could ask from the University of Auckland, the next session you'll see is called The Bigger Picture, and we're extremely lucky to have representatives from the Health Research Council and the National Science Project to talk to us before we break at 3 o'clock for afternoon tea. So the Health Research Council is represented by Mr. Stacey Penny, who's a Senior Manager in the Maori Health Research Investment Area, and Lashan, Pamana Wesley, I hope I got that right, who's a Project Coordinator. So could I ask him to come up, please, and thank you very much indeed for making the journey up here.
Kia ora koutou, ko Stacey Penny tōku ingoa. I've given Lashana a reprieve, she can sit this one out. Before I kick off, I just want to give my thanks to the organisers for inviting us here to be here today to talk with you a little bit about what we do and how you can possibly utilise us as a resource going forward. And also just really thankful for the opportunity to be a witness to some of the discussions that have been happening today. I'll talk a bit at the end about some of the work that our policy team's doing, and a lot of the conversations that you guys have been having today will feed into that quite well. So, my name is Stacey Penny, and I'm Senior Manager in our Research, Investment and Contracts team. My primary responsibility is for the Māori Health Research Investment portfolio, but I also manage a few aspects of our partnership and international portfolios, and along with my team also in charge of our emerging research and first grants, which are quite a key resource for developing capacity and capability in the health research workforce.
Sorry man, it's just frozen, it's coming.
Oh, it's not. So I'm just going to start off with a very brief overview about the HRC and some of our funding opportunities. This information will probably be old news to a lot of you, but hopefully for the rest of you it will give you a bit of a flavour of the work that we do. And sort of thinking about going forward after today, how, as I mentioned earlier, how you'll be able to utilise us as a resource for funding. So very briefly, our organisation is the government's we're responsible for managing the government's primary investment in health research. Our mission statement there is benefiting New Zealand through health research. We're established as a Crown entity by the Health Research Council Act of 1990. That really set up the terms of reference for our governing board, the council, and also some of our operational parameters. Our council is currently chaired by Dr. Lester Levy, who I'm sure most of you will know was the former chair for the 3 Auckland DHBs. As a Crown entity, we're in a bit of a unique position in that we're responsible to 2 ministries. So our main responsibility is through the Minister of Health at the Ministry, but we're actually funded through MBIE, or Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, and so our funding is through the Minister of Research, Science and Innovation. I haven't seen it yet, but I have heard that in the past that has caused a few tensions when those 2 ministries aren't necessarily on the same page. We're a relatively small team. There's about 36 full and part-time staff. We're based at Grafton in Auckland, conveniently located between Auckland Hospital and Auckland University. We have 3 directorates in our secretariat. So just briefly, Grant Barnett's our Director of Business Operations and our CFO. Dr. Vernon Troy, who some of you may be familiar with, is the Director of Research, Investments and Contracts, and Dr. Tanya Pocock is Director of Strategy and Policy at DHRC. I'm just going to briefly cover some key points about some of our main funding mechanisms, starting with the annual funding round, which some of you will be familiar with. So this is really where we do the bulk of our investment in health research and contributes to the majority of money that we invest. So we have 5 grant types. I won't go into a lot of detail about any of these. You can find more information about this on our website or contact myself or any of my colleagues for further information. So starting with programs, which are to a maximum value of $5 million over a 5-year term. We then have projects, which form the bulk of our funding. They're worth $1.2 million over a 3-year term. Feasibility studies, $250,000 over 2 years. Those are really if a research team is wanting to undertake a smaller piece of research to determine the feasibility of completing a larger trial. Emerging researcher first grants I've already mentioned, $250,000 over 3 years. So these are for relatively recent graduates who are looking to develop their own independent career as a researcher. And finally, our Explorer grants, which were recently introduced a couple of years ago. These really target sort of higher risk research for which there might not be a lot of preliminary data, and they were sort of introduced just in a way to sort of encourage a bit of risk and innovation in some of our research projects. I'll just talk briefly about the funding round budget. These stats are from the 2018 round, which just completed in June, and we made our announcements. We invested a total of just over $87 million through those 5 different grant types, funding 5 programs, 49 projects, 10 feasibility studies, 13 emerging researcher grants, and 10 Explorer grants. That figure, we've seen an increase in recent years. Some of you who are more familiar with the HRC will know our funding was fairly stagnant for a number of years and sat at about $75 million a year. Until a couple of years ago, we received an increase in investment from the government. So that will be ramping up over the next couple of years. I think it's aiming for around $120 million by 2020. And I won't go into a lot of detail here. This just shows the success rates for all of our award types in the annual funding round. So I should add that all of our research investment is competitive. And if you look at the stats, so looking at programs, the top line, for example, 14 applications and 5 of those were funded, representing just under 36% success rate. The key one that most people are interested in is the project success rate, the second line down. So we had a total of 373 EOI applications, expression of interest applications, and eventually of those 49 were offered funding, representing a 13.1% success rate. I should indicate the number of contracts is just those that were actually offered funding. In some of those cases, more grants were deemed fundable by our assessing committees, but we have a limited budget. This slide just briefly covers our research investment streams. So everything that we invest through the annual funding round is filtered through one of 4 investment streams. The 2 largest investment streams are health and wellbeing and improving outcomes in acute and chronic conditions. They generally account for about 70% of the money that we invest through the annual funding round, and project applications or research applications through those 2 rounds range from basic biomedical science right through to applied science. 2 that may be of more interest at the moment are the Rangiho Hauora Māori investment stream. So that's our ring-fence funding for Māori health research through the annual funding round. The focus there is really building Māori knowledge and capability to address Māori health issues. We have an indicative spend of about 10% of our annual funding round budget. So if you're looking at an $80 million round, we'd be wanting to invest at least $8 million into Rangiho Hauora. Traditionally, there is an underspend in this investment stream, and that's because of a number of issues that I won't go into. The fourth investment stream is research for New Zealand health delivery. So this has an indicative budget of 20% of our annual funding round investment, and the focus here is really on more short-term impact against the investment signal. So our committees are really looking for an immediate impact on health policy, clinical decision-making, or service delivery, and that's within a 5-year timeframe. This is one area that's historically always been undersubscribed. We generally don't get anywhere near the 20% investment that we want to be making. We get a lot of high quality applications come through in terms of research ideas. Generally speaking, where applicants are falling over is the sort of connectedness with end users or stakeholders, whether that be people who influence policy or clinical decision makers. So just sort of listening to some of the discussions here between the various groups, that could be a particular area that you may want to target. The sort of, I know it's early days, but the sort of discussions that you're having at the moment, I think, could factor in very strongly into success through that health delivery investment stream. I'll just talk briefly about our Ngāpunahi Kitia community grants. These sit outside the annual funding round. It's actually our primary mechanism for investing through the Vision Mātauranga policy. And the focus of these grants is really to give an opportunity for iwi hapu and community groups to investigate an area of Māori health need. The key distinction between this and our other grant types is that the research really needs to be driven by community. And also, the research should be hosted and led by iwi hapu or community groups, but we do see a lot of partnerships with such groups and larger tertiary institutions such as universities. Though the value of those is $200,000 over a maximum term of 18 months. So smaller than our regular projects, but quite targeted to the needs of community. And again, an area where we see an undersubscription. And I'll just briefly mention, 2 years ago we introduced some ring-fenced funding for Pacific Health Research. So we have funding available for 2 to 3 projects focusing on Pacific Health Research. They're to a smaller value than our funding round projects. And we also have a number of emerging researcher first grants which are targeted towards Pacific students or researchers. I'll just talk briefly, I could talk a lot about career development awards, so I'm just going to skim through it because there's a lot to cover. We essentially have 3 different types of career development award. There's our general awards, we have Māori specific CDAs and also Pacific CDAs. This just shows a summary of the types of CDAs available in our general stream. I won't go through the details for each, you can find out further information, but someone I think mentioned earlier about the clinical research training fellowships. That's really to provide funding for a qualified and practicing clinician to undertake formal clinical research training in the form of a PhD. That's available to not only medical clinicians but also dentists and other allied health professionals, so nurses, pharmacists, physiotherapists can apply for that funding, and that provides just over $300,000 over a 3-year term. And I won't go through all of these, but this is just a list of all our Māori Health Career Development Awards. These really sort of span quite a wide range, starting from summer studentships for undergraduate students. We get a lot of traction with those. They go through to masters, PhDs, and postdoctoral fellowships. We get a lot of success, high success rate for these career development awards, and we're starting to see, because these have been in place for a number of years, we're starting to actually see the pipeline of students who 12, 13 years ago received a summer studentship and are now onto their postdoctoral fellowships, having received a master's scholarship from us and a PhD scholarship from us. And similarly, this just lists the Pacific Career Development Awards, essentially the same structure, ranging from summer studentships right through to postdoctoral and advanced postdoctoral fellowships. Actually, and I will just quickly mention for both Māori and Pacific, we do have a number of development grants which can be used for anyone who's wanting to apply through the for a Māori health research project or other grant type. You can actually get some seed funding to help bring in external expertise to help develop your full proposal. And again, that's quite a good pathway for perhaps communities of researchers who don't have as much experience or are sort of in the early days of planning what they'd like to achieve. And similarly, we have a number of knowledge translation grants, which are for any researchers working in Māori or Pacific Health who want to undertake specific knowledge dissemination activities, which could be anything from hui through to publications. Now I'll just talk briefly about our partnership program. So this differs from our annual funding round in that the projects are generally smaller and much more focused. The focus really is to develop the evidence base in key areas of need and strengthen the links between policy and practice. For these partnership programs, we partner directly with funders and other stakeholders to commission research through an RFP process. Excuse me. What we find is that having stakeholder involvement at those early stages of making funding decisions really increases the utility and uptake of the research that results. And we find also that the research that we can fund as partners is generally more substantive than either agency could afford to commission alone. For those processes, for those applications, the HRC manages the entire assessment process in conjunction with the funding partners. This just shows a list of some of the recent HRC partnerships we've been involved in. So you can see, for example, we partnered with Pharmac to commission some research looking at health outcomes associated with pharmaceuticals. Ministry of Health we partnered with, they were interested in undertaking some research on looking at different models of primary care, so looking specifically at PHOs. And for example, with the Ministry of Social Development, we partnered with them. They were keen to undertake some research looking at different case management processes for enhancing employment opportunities for people living with long-term health conditions or disabilities. So again, very specific, and unlike our funding round, which is generally researcher-initiated or curiosity-led research, this is really targeted and specific. Now, I'm just going to end with a couple of slides looking at one of the most important pieces of work that our policy team is currently working on. Hopefully most of you are aware about the launch of the New Zealand Health Research Strategy last year, the first time New Zealand has had a health research strategy. I won't go into too much details, but just to talk about, if you're familiar with the strategy, you'll know that there were a number of strategic priorities identified. And under those priorities, there are a list of 10 complementary actions. The first 4 actions listed on the left here are being led by the HRC. So that's to develop health research priorities for New Zealand, invest in healthy futures for Māori, equitable outcomes for Pacific peoples, and also the development of a strong health research workforce. I think the numbering's up there, but the next 3 actions are being led by the Ministry of Health, and that's focused on strengthening health sector participation, strengthening the clinical research environment, and enabling and embedding translation across the health sector. The final 3 actions are led by MB, and those are really focused on innovation and commercialization of research outputs and industry partnerships. I'm just going to talk about Action 1 that HRC is leading, which is to prioritise investments. So HRC has been tasked with developing a set of national health research priorities. These are for the entire country, not just for the health research that the HRC funds. And the aim of these priorities is really to guide the government's investment in health research. The expectation will be that all government funding will demonstrate alignment with the priorities in some way. That's really up to each individual organisation. Will need to determine how best they align with those priorities. Excuse me. But from the HRC's perspective, these will really guide the HRC's investment strategy and framework over the next few years. And also, just a note, so this slide's written from our policy team. This won't mean an end to curiosity-led or investigator-initiated research. Our teams will be looking at how we can ensure that we develop a framework which can incorporate those priorities, but also still allow that sort of blue sky research. So this infographic, again, I won't go into too much detail. You can find more information about this on our website. It just demonstrates the priority setting process that our policy team is currently working on. So the entire process started in June 2018 and will come to a conclusion in December next year. It began with the establishment of a development group with a range of expertise who have produced some draft, what they're calling strategic investment areas. These will be the sort of top level priorities. We're then going on to a public consultation on those draft SIAs. That feedback from the public consultation will be reviewed by our expert panels and development group, and they'll also undergo international peer review to further refine those strategic investment areas. The ministers will sign off on the SIAs, and then our development group will start refining or defining some research themes to sit under those strategic investment areas. Those research themes will, I think, be more specific than the SIAs, and they will also undergo a period of public consultation in the middle of next year. The intent is then that the two ministers will announce the final draft priorities at the end of next year. The key thing that I've been asked to sort of address today is really the step here, the public consultation. So that information, so the public consultation will start next week, and there will be more information, or there should be information available now on our website, and if you subscribe to any of our communication channels, it will be signposted there as well. It's sort of based on certain constraints around time and money. So we're opening for a 6-week web-based consultation. There will be a number of targeted face-to-face consultations with Māori, Pacific and other priority populations, and we'll be announcing those over the coming weeks. And I think importantly, this information will be fed directly through the development group who is developing those strategic investment areas. We've already drawn a lot of feedback from other consultation processes that have been undertaken. So for the health strategy, for example, we've got a lot of useful feedback about that. So that's also been incorporated. So consultation opens 3rd of September and runs through to the 12th of October. You can make submissions through our consultation website. And yeah, really, we'd just like to encourage everyone to get involved in this process. You can make submissions as individuals or research teams, or as organisations, communities. All of that information will be considered in further refinement of the draft SIAs. So yeah, just keep an eye on our consultation website and through our update newsletter. And if you do have any other questions, you can either refer to myself or contact our contact is Dr. Patricia Anderson, who's our Chief Advisor Policy at the HRC. That's all from me. So does anyone have any questions at this point?
Always take it as an extremely good presentation when nobody has any questions at the end. Thank you very much, Stacey, for coming and for providing that very significant bolus of information for the group. I'm going to ask if your slides might possibly be made available to people afterwards, and that applies also to Ian and John, because I think there was some very useful information which we could put up for the group afterwards. Thank you. Sarah Hetrick and Tanya Cargo are here from the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Auckland, and are going to talk to the National Science Project. And who's going first?
We usually go together.
You can go together.
It's a bicultural
I'll let you apply for the microphone. Thank you for coming.
Kia ora mai tātou, tēnei tumihi nui ki a koutou, ko hui mai nei roki tēnei whare mo tēnei take he take hauhono mō rangahau I roti tēnei kaupapa. Tēnei tumihi nui ki a koe, ki a koutou hoki. Ko ai au, ko hainu e te waka, ko tūrugo o te maunga, ko taumarere te awa, ko Ngāti Manu te hapuru, ko Ngāpuhi nui tonu te iwi. Ko Bristow Davies, rawa ko Davies aku whānau, I roti I te puku o te ao, Kawakawa. So kia ora, my name's Tanya, and I'm from Kawakawa, and so yeah, it kind of feels like I'm close to home. Not quite there, but near to it, so kia ora. I'm a clinical psychologist by trade.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko remutaka te moanga, ko te awa kairangi te awa, ko Pākehā te iwi, ko Sarah Hetrick toku ingoa. So I'm a clinical psychologist as well. I've spent a bit of time working in Melbourne, but very happily back in the Department of Psychological Medicine. And we are presenting together. Get on with it now.
Let's do it. Rock on, baby.
We're presenting about one of the National Science Challenges that has been led by Sally Mary over the last 5 years, who's here. And Tanya and I are tasked with the job of leading it into the next tranche. This challenge is a tipu e rea, a better start. It's one of 3 health challenges. We've heard a presentation this morning about one of the projects from Ageing Well, and there's also Healthier Lives. So these MB funded National Science Challenges are a different way of doing science, where it's about researchers collaborating, it's about mobilising research and science to create impact that makes changes in areas that New Zealand is facing challenges. So there are non-health related challenges as well. I'll talk then, I'll start. Yes, I've got the pointer.
Oh yeah, give you the pointer.
There we go, so that's us. There are 3 parts to, or 3 themes within A Better Start, a tipu e rea. These 3 themes respond to the issues that you can see up there about healthy weight. So 1 in 3 New Zealand children are overweight or obese. 35% of Year 1 children do not achieve expected standards for reading. We know that emotional, behavioural, social difficulties are relevant for 1 in 4 adolescents in New Zealand. So we have themes around those 3 areas. We're leading the Resilient Teens part of that, or theme. We have a focus on addressing needs for Māori and Pasifika children. And we also, actually I think the next slide, there we go, a lovely infographic put together by our team showing the 3 themes and the integrating theme of big data. So that's a team working with the integrated data infrastructure, which is administrative data that's linked, and that's really, they're doing a whole heap of looking at what's going on, but we're interested in it and within our theme in terms of looking at real world impact of what we do. Briefly about A Better Start, so it's complex, there's 4 themes that I've just spoken about. So we have a board, a directorate, operations group, the theme leaders has been Sally, is now us, and we are co-leading that. and then the teams of scientists working within each theme. I'm going to hand over to Tanya.
Oh, that's quick, eh? I don't need that. Yeah, no. You can rock on though. So I'm going to talk about sexy teenagers, resilient teens, and in particular approach, and obviously Sally's expertise. She's one of those quiet leaders. She has to be when there's a lot of Māori around, but anyway, you know, one of those quiet leaders at the back that gets all the funding, does the hard science, and makes Māori look good. So thanks very much for that, Sal. Do you want to push on? And we'll have a kind of look at... So Vision Mātauranga is really, and to be fair, we have struggled with what that is, because Vision Mātauranga from a kaupapa Māori framework is totally different from what Envy sees it as. Quite a... maybe a generalisable idea about what Vision Mātauranga or Māori knowledge is. And so it's been a bit of a challenge to put in being able to do what we want to do in the north here as well, back home, which is to prioritise Māori need. And that has to be led by us as Māori. We need really good partnerships, we need really good Pākehā scientists, to help us, but we need to be in charge and we need to be in the lead. And it was actually Sally's vision to say that if we really wanted to have at least a bicultural approach to this new tranche moving forwards in the challenge, that Sarah and I would lead that. So we kind of wanted to show that for us it is going to be a bicultural approach, at the least, in terms of being able to support the treaty and the treaty principles. This is you.
I mean, I've just put up a little bit about, just so you get a sense of the theme as a whole, what each of the other themes have been working on, and then we're going to present to you what we've been working on in the last 5 years. When I say we, I mean Sally and her team, and we are taking over. Thank you, Sally. So, healthy weight. They've been doing a lot around prediction modelling, but the really interesting stuff I think that they've been doing on top of that, and that's very interesting, is around actually engaging with parents and whānau in terms of whether they want to know about that, what they feel about having that information presented to them. And then some really interesting work around, they've done, Marewa Glover has led that and done a really large number of focus groups around the complexities really of providing healthy food, with cost being the thing that came up as the key concern across all the groups that were interviewed in focus groups, but a number of things that went into that complex picture. Successful learning, again, they've done some work with the prediction modelling around what happens. They use the before school check. I guess the key piece of work that they've been highlighting is an intervention which is aimed at Year 1 children, and it's a literacy intervention, and they've had really good results from that. And what they really want to do with that, again, going into tranche 2, is to think about how to implement that. So they've done a study in one setting. They want to, and it was quite intensive in terms of the research input, they want to scale that out to see how they can get it being used in schools more broadly, so empowering teachers to deliver that program. The big data group have been exploring, whether and how and in what ways all of that data can be linked and used across all of the thematic theme areas. So they've done all sorts of things, kind of looking at prediction, looking at associations. In our particular area, we've just finished a paper looking at antidepressant prescribing and what that looks like across different communities. So on to us, I think. Here we go. So this is the resilient team theme. This is what we presented to MB just a little while ago. Some of this will be very familiar to you. So we're all about teams. Not surprisingly, I guess, because we know, as I said, that 1 in 4 New Zealand young people experience social, emotional and behavioural difficulties, and we know that these are a kind of key risk factor for suicide, and that New Zealand has the highest rate of youth suicide in OECD countries. So that's really where our focus is.
And I guess why digital, so this is kind of our space, is, well, because it works. And we know that we can take interventions that are face-to-face and put them onto a computer or an internet, and it can work, provided we can get them to do it. The other part is that screenagers use digital technology a lot. Yeah. Having had 4 screenagers myself, I know that one way to get them to the dinner table, turn off the internet, the Wi-Fi. Yeah. So most of us know that experience. And the other thing, I guess, is that digital interventions can have the potential to reach at the time when young people need them, which is probably 9 o'clock on a Friday night after they've just been dumped by their boyfriend. Yeah, so that's what we're kind of looking at. That's our space, if you like. It's not everybody's cup of tea. Some of my queer aren't very happy about the digital stuff, but anyway, we'll just keep working with them.
I guess for MB in particular, we were just highlighting the work that has been done in this space already, led by Sally. So you may or may not know, I imagine you mostly know about Sparks, which is an online CBT game-based intervention for young people. And we were really demonstrating to MB the road from the research lab to impact in the real world. So you can see there that it's an intervention that's been studied in a number of RCTs and in open trials in different settings and with different populations. It graced the cover of the British Medical Journal in 2012, and then as part of the Prime Minister's Mental Health Project was rolled out by the Ministry of Health to New Zealand. So it's accessible in New Zealand. It's also had international reach, so it's licensed in Japan and in Canada, where an Inuit version is being developed, and that work in that space to get it out into the bigger world beyond New Zealand continues to happen. So what has been going on in the last few years is a lot of co-design work with young people, family and whānau, and that's been across all of the pieces of work that will come together to form what we're calling an IT platform or digital ecosystem, which includes, we've heard about Youth Chat this morning, so it has that screening component where young people can identify what it is that they might want to work on. It includes BITS, behavioural intervention technology, so we've been working on an app, as well as a chatbot. Who knows what a chatbot is?
Aroha.
Aroha.
Coming to you soon.
So these are the specific digital interventions that we've been working on. But I guess the key innovation is really the platform on which all of this sits, which is potentially linked to IDI, but certainly the platform has the ability to monitor what happens to people using these interventions. We see it as having the potential to use innovative research methodologies to quickly, we're very interested in rapid trials, sort of designs to test digital interventions within the platform. So there's huge potential for there to be not just interventions that are based around, resiliency and well-being, but around well-being more broadly, so physical health, whole approaches to health for our young people. So that's where the potential lies, I think, in a pipeline of development and iteration. And I guess we talk about it, our vision is for it to be a sort of one-stop shop, digital one-stop shop, or, the Trade Me of youth health, the place where people will go. Oh yeah.
We're on.
This sort of shows the integration, how it all works
It's
together.
common for young people to feel stressed out or down. Mental health problems affect at least 1 in 4 young people. There's about 7 students in an average-sized New Zealand class. Over half of these young people don't get the support they need because they find it hard to ask for help and access services. Habits is a secure web and mobile space where young people can access digital screening and intervention tools for mental health and wellbeing. It's based on proven strategies that work for young New Zealanders. So, how does it work? Meet Edina. She's just started high school. Edina is nervous about being at a new school. Edina lives at home with her whānau. Like many families, they don't always see eye to eye, and Edina finds it hard to talk about what's going on. All of these worries are adding up, and she feels down a lot of the time. Sometimes she cries in her room alone at night. She doesn't know what to do and where to go for help. So, where does Habits come from? Edina's school has signed up to use Habits, and all Year 9 students are trying it out. Edina starts with Check It, answering a few questions about how things are going for her. Once she's filled it all in, Habits responds with feedback on her scores and gives her some options to move forward. The school nurse gets reports on all the Year 9s who have completed Check It. Edina's results show that she's feeling down, and so the school nurse makes a time to see her. The nurse and Edina have a talk about what's going on at home and school. They work together on what might help, including choosing some support people. Edina chooses to tell her dad about Habits. Edina agrees to try one of the Habits apps. They start the app together. It looks helpful, and Edina decides to keep using the app at home on her phone. At the end of the activity, Edina has the option to share her progress with her support people. Edina likes using the app and decides to check out what else is on Habits' site. She finds other apps that look helpful, and bit by bit, she starts to feel better. By using Habits, Edina's school have been able to identify other students who are having a hard time and support them to get help via the apps, the school nurse, and other options. The research from the Habits team can use anonymous data to improve the apps. That way they can help more and more young people to flourish with the support of digital technologies.
Yep.
Thank you very much to Sarah and Tanya for another fantastic presentation. And Sally, thank you obviously for the great support you give them. So we're getting down to the sharp end now, and I think the next session and the final session will be extremely useful. In this session we're looking to learn more about mentoring the mentor, and on behalf of Vanessa, I need to make you aware of the fact that this is going to be a very interactive session, so don't for a moment think you can sit back. She is very definitely expecting significant audience participation, as well as you having the opportunity to learn from her colleagues. So one of the questions which is listed on the agenda is, how do we build supportive and sustainable infrastructure in Northland? And so we definitely are getting to the sharp end, things that we take away from today that can make a real difference. So I'd ask you to welcome Vanessa and Martin Connolly, Professor Martin Connolly, Professor John Windsor, and Verity Humberstone, who is one of our psychiatrists here. And Vanessa, over to you.
No problem. Good afternoon. Okay, so we're here as a panel discussion group, which means we're not going to put up large amounts of presentations for you guys. We want to start a discussion, and we want to learn about what you need to establish some mentor-type relationships for you as mentors. So we're not talking about for students necessarily, but as for you leading students, what sort of help do you need and what sort of mentor relationships do you need? Let me introduce myself a bit more. So I'm Vanessa Jordan. I come from Auckland University. I am based in the obstetrics and gynecology department, but it's mainly because that's where Cochrane New Zealand live, and I am the New Zealand Cochrane Fellow. My background is that I am a research methodologist with a little bit of stats on the side. So I come at this from that background of designing the research, and I can't reiterate again, we did say it earlier and I do want to say it again, please involve your methodologists and your statisticians at the beginning of the projects. It's very difficult to analyse data when you've been brought in at the last minute and given an Excel spreadsheet and go. It's very hard work at that point in time. So part of this mentoring relationship will be trying to get you to establish those relationships so that you know who to go to and who to talk to and who to involve right at the beginning of the research projects. What I'm going to do now is hand over to my panel members and each introducing themselves with a few words on mentorship as well.
So Kira Koto, my name is Martin Connolly. I'm a POM. I was born in Manchester, trained in Newcastle upon Tyne. Very proud of both of those things. Also very proud to have been accepted as a New Zealand citizen 2 months ago. I've been asked to talk briefly about what makes a good mentor. I have been a mentee. I graduated to being a mentor at some point, gradually graduated to be, I was both at one point. I started researching back in 1984 by great serendipity and sort of fell into it and never fell out of it. Fell in love with it within 6 weeks. In terms of being a mentor, it's very similar to being a clinical mentor. You've probably heard of the 3 A's: ability, affability, and availability. And they apply to being a research mentor as well as they apply to being a clinical mentor. There are great gains, even if you're only personally interested in self-advancement, there are great gains. So my greatest mentoring story is being approached when I was just a senior lecturer back in Manchester in about 1992. Being approached in the middle of a very busy clinical ward round by a physiotherapist who I never met, never heard of, who interrupted my ward round and said that he had been advised by his boss to come and speak to me about getting some research done. And that was a bit annoying when you're trying to see patients, and I thought it was a bit strange, but I made an appointment to see him. And over the years, we produced 25 papers together. Oh, I should point out that his English was his 7th language, shows you how bright he was, and it wasn't very good at that point. We subsequently produced 25 papers together, and now he's a professor of physiotherapy in a university in California. So that was massively productive for both him and me. So if all you're interested in is self-advancement, being a mentor is great. Collaboration. We've heard a little bit about this, and people touched on this. Many of us have been on many HRC reviewing panels looking at research applications and judging them, and the same will be true on any panel. I exaggerate for the sake of effect, but there are 3 types of, or 3 standards of application which fall into 3 types. There are applications that come from the ivory tower, research institutions, and they are normally great on the science, pretty good at identifying the problem and identifying how to do the research. They are not great on the application and the translatability, and they're normally led by people like me. Then there are applications from non-researching clinicians, which are fantastic on the problem, fantastic on the application and the translatability of the problem, but sometimes not quite so good on how to do it, the research methodology. And they're normally led by non-academics who work very closely on the coalface. And then there are the collaborative ones, which have both sets of people in, and they're the ones who get funded. Because they're the ones that have the holistic approach and the overall approach. And so being a mentor is about fostering those collaborations, I would suggest. It's also about a little bit about perspective. We heard earlier on about the percentage of grant applications that are funded. In the UK, it's even less than 13%. So I was always taught it's roughly 1 in 10. You don't want to be saying that to your relatively junior researcher on day 1 when he or she is thinking about starting a research career. But at some point, you have to build in the perspective about those things for that individual so that they don't get too disillusioned. It's a little bit like in a clinical sense, we always say to I always say to my junior staff and my students, if you can tell the patient that something rather alarming but not particularly medically worrying is going to happen to them, tell them in advance. So, simple example, we're going to put you on iron tablets, it's going to make your stool turn black. If you tell them in advance when it happens, they don't worry. If it happens and you haven't told them and then you reassure them, they may not believe you. And the same is true in terms of mentorship. And finally, and again I would reiterate this, I used to think that there are 2 different types of statisticians. Those you can understand and those you can't understand. That's not true. As I've become less naive and more grumpy, I now recognise there are indeed two different types of statisticians. Those who understand you and those who can't understand you. And those that can understand you are the ones that you've involved right from the start in the design of your project. An HRC, a National Science Challenge, will expect you to have involved a statistician right from the start, and for that person to be a PI. So part of mentorship is involving statisticians and connecting statisticians with researchers within your own aegis. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thanks, John Windsor again. I've introduced myself before. When I was asked to maybe make a few comments on mentoring, I genuinely smiled. This is something that I love to talk about. I'm not going to talk for long. But this actually is something that surprises me, because when students, particularly students, come along asking for a research project, have got something I can do, that's a common question. I'm sure you guys get that as well. I take a step back and ask them why, find out that it's about career advancement, and say you've got a choice. Either we're going to talk about a specific little project which will go on your CV and you'll be able to advance your career, or you're really asking something that's a little bit broader and a little bit deeper, and that's what I'm really interested in. So I see mentoring really as core business, as a clinical academic. I see it as a whole of life thing, which is I want to get to a position with the students where they feel confident and can trust me to talk about not just research where it fits in their career, but their life in general. And I find most find it very helpful to have somebody a little bit further along who's prepared to spend the time to listen to where they're at. There's lots of career challenges and hurdles that they find it helpful to have somebody a little bit more experienced about. So I find mentoring one of the most satisfying and rewarding things that I do. And I think it's because I try and take that more holistic and deeper approach to it. It's also very satisfying on the advocacy and promotion side of things, so that when people have come through time with you and they're looking for a reference or looking for a job overseas or whatever, it's really nice to be able to promote them through into that. I do recognize that mentoring is not something that I can do with everybody, and indeed with many of them I can really not contribute to all of their needs or their questions. And so I encourage more than one mentor, particularly at different stages during a person's career development. But the thing that I think about most here is that it's a privilege to be able to sit down with often the brightest young people that have been selected into medical school, and to help them along the pathway that's best for them. And to convey that it's not about them coming and doing research for me, but about their development as a person, their development as a clinician. And often research is actually learning skills that make them a more complete leader, because I think every single medical student's a leader, whether they admit it or not. And so giving them confidence in the things that they're passionate about is something that I really enjoy, and it's good to be part of.
Well, hello again. I'm Verity Humberstone, for those I didn't introduce myself to this morning, and I'm a clinical consultant psychiatrist. One of the roles that I have up here is a training facilitator for the registrars in the registrar scheme, and I've also done some work with my colleague Chomi Kelly at providing a structure for when medical students enter the mental health system up here from Pukawakawa coming into psychiatry. I guess from what I wanted to share about mentoring is that in psychiatry we're very obsessed with supervising people, and I think this is probably somewhat slightly different from other specialties, but the core part of anyone's journey to becoming a psychiatrist is embedded with strict time frames around supervision from the word dot, and requirements for supervisors to have certain updates and feedback into our centralised director of training. And so I think the challenge for us really is to take the skills from our experience as psychiatrists and translate them to providing a type of mentorship on the research framework for our trainees. One of the things that we've got coming up that's very important for us within mental health up here is the curriculum for training for fellowship has changed within recent years. We have been very keen to get our psychiatrists fully trained through Northland, and it was only as recent as, I think, 2012 that we got our first registrar that did all of their training through Northland, and that's a huge advantage for us trying to recruit people. And one of the things that's happened with the fellowship review is now a compulsory part of the final year is that the psychiatric registrars must complete a reasonable research project called a scholarly project. And in bringing that about, I think the college possibly underestimated the confidence of a lot of clinicians who may feel fine to do supervision, but feel somewhat rusty in their research skills and research needs. We've had some support. A psychiatrist who works for the University of Sally, Gary Chung, has done some recent work where he's interviewed people who have supervised scholarly projects and supervised research and invited SMOs to get their mentoring skills updated and trying to centralise our knowledge around research supervision, but certainly this is going to be a very relevant area for us going forward. So I guess in summary, from a mental health perspective, we have a lot of the content skills and the supervision framework already well embedded in place, but the challenge for us is going to be many of our psychiatrists may have had several years since they've done a dissertation project or a research project, and with some urgency we really need to think about getting a better updated skills in terms of mentoring research.
Okay, so you've heard a little bit about what we think, but what I would like to do now is open to you guys. Can you tell us some instances where some mentoring has worked well here, or sometimes that you've been frustrated? Do you think out of today that you have already made some connections that you think you would be able to use for mentoring, or are you still desperately wanting to know how to do that? Anybody want to start the ball rolling?
Thank you. So I am a supervisor for foreign medical graduates in pathology, and I had to attend a training day through the New Zealand Medical Council, which was a bit corny in a way, but it was actually really, really helpful. And it actually set out the expectations that the Medical Council has of supervisors in the areas that we're supposed to cover. And I find that really helpful, but if I was to be supervising somebody for a project and not knowing the ins and outs of what's required in the university, I guess I'd rely on a co-supervisor. But having some sort of training or expectation, because the Medical Council is very good at this, they do publications of what's required of supervisors and supervisees. So to have sort of guidelines and possibly even training like that might be a helpful thing to consider if you don't already have it.
I've got to say, personal experience, I've just finished co-supervising with a colleague in public health on an obesity project, and I was all the methods, on top of the methods, but I needed somebody that was on top of the obesity research. Now, the university does have it all, but it's quite buried. So trying to find the regulations and what you need, it's not as easy as you think it is. So it was so helpful to have my co-supervisor who has supervised so many master's students that she was going, no, here's the booklet, here's this what we need, this is for your contact, because it isn't as easy as it would seem. And I think you're right, we do need a resource that brings a lot of that together. For PhDs it's actually quite good, but for the slightly different types of degrees, the dissertations versus the theses and all that sort of stuff, that can be a little hazy. So good suggestion.
Alan wanted to comment. I was just going to say that one of the things that is great in our department, and I think in every department, we have a postgraduate advisor and so that when it comes to issues about regulations or just the technical side of what's required for particular degrees, I find our postgraduate advisor really, really helpful, and so that sort of advice is available.
Do we have any other comments?
I just want some clarity around, a lot of this conversation seems to be in the context of a person being part of a program. So they're either a master's student, a PhD, or they're doing some PG, something or other. What if we have a staff member who doesn't, they've already done their masters, or they don't want to sign up for a PG program, but they've got a really good research idea, and we'd like to link them into your wealth of knowledge and expertise, but they don't want to sign up for a program. Can we still do that?
Absolutely.
Good.
As you've heard from the floor earlier this morning, we are always on the lookout for enthusiastic people I was about to say enthusiastic young people, that's very ageist of me. Enthusiastic people of all ages who are bright and may know nothing about the methodology, but are keen to do the work. And again, we've already heard this morning, you don't do it right unless you're enthusiastic about your topic. So people are keen, they may not even know what topic they're enthusiastic about, but if you can get them keen on a topic, then however inexperienced they are, we're keen to, inverted commas, have them, close inverted commas.
Okay, one of the things I was talking to one about during the afternoon tea break is we also have...
I just wanted to kind of say, and one of the things is that if you're non-medicine, often people think that research is the realm of academics and docs. And so I just kind of want to say that, do seek out mentors within your discipline, but also not in your discipline. Some of my best mentors have been physicians and people from completely different disciplines than me, but they have taught me some of the most profound research in their subjects. So I often think that nurses think that they should go to nurses, but actually multidisciplinary research is where it's at, really.
Amen.
And multidisciplinary research is what gets funded as well.
Okay, we've got a question back.
Hi, Chris Hartson here again. You asked for an example of where mentorship works well, and one of the things I've learned since I came here is about the enthusiasm of the University of Auckland to help out. So I'll just tell you quickly my story when I came here, is that I didn't really know anyone in the research environment, and I sent Ian Bissett an email and asked him if he'd help and be a bit of an academic mentor for me. That was 2 years ago. And then we had some junior researchers who plugged into that, and here we are 2 years later with something that's happening, and I'm working with Ian on a national project in bowel cancer. And what that tells me is that this is all real. If you actually seek out your mentors, they're really keen to help you. And I agree with John, you get to work with these keen, enthusiastic young people who are really interested in their projects. So this is not all just talk, this is reality. And it works in practice. So I've benefited from it, and then hopefully we can pass that on as well.
That is a key factor, is relationships. I think people underestimate how much when you get something that you might be working on, so say we've got a potential guideline that we might be looking at, we always reach out to the people that have already talked to us or already emailed, or that was a student on a particular program even a year or so ago, but that had interest in that area. So it is establishing those relationships that helps very much in moving your own work forward.
I think the other thing within mental health is very early on, talking to consumer representation about what's important for them. And again, we're lucky within Northland that we've got good mental health consumers within our services, and also family and whānau representatives within our services. And when we've been looking at projects very early on, having the discussion about what their thoughts are about whether it's actually relevant and meaningful for them, I think that's imperative.
And once again, I keep coming back to funding, but it's not just us that are saying that. The funders recognise that too. So co-development, you've heard from HRC, you've heard from the National Science Challenge about co-development. And the funders don't recognise it's important just for the sake of it. They recognise it's important because it's important. And that's backed up by their funding priorities.
Okay, just for the last, because we've only got a few minutes left, we've talked about the principles and what's a good idea. What is going to help you move forward? So when we're talking about making up mentoring relationships, what do you feel you need? Or do you not know what you need? Do you want suggestions from us?
So just from the other side, what we would like is to have the opportunity to have contact in some way with the department for our group of local psychiatrist supervisors. I don't know the best format for that, Sally, whether that's through asking Gary, but if we had some sort of formalised way of getting support at updating our skills from that more confidence in the supervisory relationship to supporting the development and the mentorship from the research framework, that would be really helpful for us.
I guess a question from us is that we've sometimes organised sort of workshops and so on in response to things that people have asked from different cohort sites, and then trying to find a model for delivery that makes it easy for people to get to seems really difficult. So we've had some workshops in Auckland so that everybody can come from the different cohort sites. We've also tried to bring them to the different sites, but trying to find a time that's really good in terms of clinicians seems tricky.
I think that's correct, and I think that sometimes reflects the need for quite a lot of notice, and being able to do it remotely rather than travelling is the best way.
Any other comments on requirements?
Speaking from hospital point of view, maybe having certainly in some Auckland hospitals there's the role of a clinical fellow or some sort of mid-level doctor who has, well, doesn't have to be a doctor, but a staff member that has the knowledge of what's out there, has their own projects, but their role is that of connection. They are someone that people go to when they aren't maybe entirely sure, and they have an idea of the broad view, and are able, if they can't specifically help this person that comes to them, they can send them in the right direction. And whether that's an DHB or a university-funded position or is it above, I'm not sure. I'm unsure if that exists currently in Northland. Something along those lines.
I'm sure that's been noted.
Vanessa, just before you finish, you talked when you opened to the floor about having some suggestions yourself potentially. Do you have any thoughts about how you're going to help support us?
Well, one of the things that I was thinking about is the relationships, and obviously there's been some relationships forged here today, hopefully, and I would say that that needs to be nurtured. So you can't just leave today and then not contact anybody for 6 months or a year. It's something that the person that you met, that you chatted to, send them an email. Say it was good to see you. Try to follow up some of the relationships. And one of the things that I was talking to Wynne about that I'd like to offer as a potential would be, I'm funded to run 2 Cochrane workshops a year. And one of those has to be in Auckland because that's where our main population is, but one can be anywhere else. So if Northland was interested, I could bring that here at the beginning of next year. That would be free, basically, as long as you gave me a room. Need somewhere to do the talking. And it is about Cochrane, so it's a little bit limited. It's basically on randomised controlled trials, but it has a really nice base to research design And the second day is largely spent on statistics. So we do odds ratios and risk ratios and means differences and just some of that very basic stuff. And if there is interest here, maybe that's something you guys could let me know, and then I will definitely put it on the agenda when we're discussing where that first one will be.
Hi, I don't know if this fits in with your question, but it's just a thought I've been having, because I'm from the oncology department, and we're a bit like what Verity was saying with psychiatry, in that our trainees now have to do research as part of their training, and we want to do research too. And I was just thinking it might be really helpful, like, let's just talk about statistics. If we had one platform that the DHB supported, and then we had like training for mentors and how to use that, so it was like more efficient for all of us to use primarily one platform, and then have sort of training on how to use that and how to teach that to people that we're trying to mentor doing the project.
So you're on platform, you're talking about
Sorry, like
package?
software.
Yeah, so you're talking about using R or Starter or...
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Because I think like it probably doesn't matter which package you use, but if we all have access to something, and then we have training in that package, that would also make like your job with the statistics group easier, because you're all familiar with using the same package and teaching that to people to answer the right questions that they're trying to answer with their research projects.
I see a number of things coming together very nicely. I mean, what David's been talking about, a statistical group providing stuff. I mean, you could also provide training, could you not? Brody's looking to be something that would help introduce people to expertise locally, or down in Auckland if necessary, and come back to that needing for a physical entity and an identifiable person within the organisation to whom people could go for advice. I need stats help, I need to find somebody with these skills or whatever. It seems to me that's what's going to be necessary to start making progress here. Yeah.
Thanks, John. Vanessa, if I can just say at this stage, without waiting to consult anybody else, the offer of a Cochrane workshop would be warmly accepted. That would be wonderful.
So Mike, what we thought we'd do is we'll email everyone, and we can get some responses so that Vanessa gets an idea of how much interest there is as well. So if people respond, they might commit a little more. Yeah, that sounds great.
Thank you.
We'll provide a room. That's all we have to do. No brainer.
Good deal. Filling in the. So I'm afraid time marches on, and I'm going to have to end this session. But thank you very much to the panel members, and Vanessa, thank you for leading me. So now we're in the final session, or just about to start the final session, and Professor Alan Merry is going to be joined by Nick Chamberlain, Bronwyn Hedgecock, Chris Harmston, Terry Ann Clark and Aisha Green to have a discussion which is on the agenda titled Developing a Research Agenda for Northland. But basically this is the part of the day where we come up with firm actions which will support and promote research in Northland. And I should tell you that the doors to the building have been locked. And you will not be leaving until we have clear actions that will support and promote research in Northland. So please help me out.
I'm just sitting right.
Kia ora tātou. Ko te rangatira Dr. Nick Chamberlain, tēnā koe. Ko te tangata te whenua o tēnei rohe, ko na iwi o Tītai Tokoro, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Alan aho, I whānau mai rātou, I whānau mai aho I Zimbabwe, no South Africa oku matua, no Ireland oku tupuna. Toku toru aku tamariki, I whānau mai rātou I Aotearoa, I hakwe, I ahau mai, I ahu I tawahi, ko Aotearoa toka kianga. Ko ahau te whenua, ko te whenua ahau, Aotearoa tuturu. Nō reira, tēnā koutou kina marae, tēnā koutou katoa.
Welcome everybody. I think we know most people, but not everybody. This session is very much going to be
about practical outcomes. I'm going to just start by emphasizing what was said earlier. Anybody who thinks that the objective of research is to produce papers is a little sad, really. Actually, papers are outputs. You have inputs, there's a framework of this, outputs are about the middle of it. They are something you produce, you also produce expertise, you produce information. But what we're interested in is impact. And impact is why I do research. It's because it actually improves the quality of the care that we as doctors and nurses and other health professionals can give to our patients. And I think that's critical. And what we've heard so far is that the opportunity to improve the impact of the care that we deliver here in Northland is huge. Because however good the actual medicine and nursing care that we are providing in our hospitals and in our primary care, we still have massive inequity in health outcomes. And that's seen more here in this part of New Zealand probably than anywhere else, I would imagine. So what I'm going to do firstly is a couple of people need to perhaps introduce themselves. And it may be best if we just go through with a quick hello, and then for the people we haven't previously introduced themselves, perhaps could. And I think for each of you at this stage, maybe we could get one comment that you think we should take forward from this. So why did we start at this end?
Kia ora koutou, TC, you know me.
Hi, Aisha Green from the Quality Unit.
Grace Harmston.
Kia ora tātou, Nick Chamberlain.
Sue Raynell.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Bronwyn tēnei. I'm one of the nurses here.
Okay, well let's start with Bronwyn at the back, because Bronwyn, I'll use this one. Bronwyn has been making notes about the things that we're going to take home. Do you have 2 or 3 key points that you've reached so far, Bronwyn?
Research hub and somewhere, a centralised place where people can go to make connections and relationships. One of the things that I think came through reasonably, well, I think strongly, was it was about biculturalism, and so Māori need to be strong leaders and partners in this, and upfront from the get-go, and a priority. And well, those are the 2 strong things that I've come away with, really, and that the university is definitely opening your doors to enable us to progress research.
Fantastic. Now,
do you want me to write them up?
yes, please, if you could, and anything else that comes out of this discussion, or I should say the other things that come out of it. Now, Sue is actually one of the things that we are doing.
My role has recently changed. The university restructured the research services in April of this year, and they've put positions in to support researchers closer to the research. So the School of Medicine has 2 research program managers and 4 research coordinators, program coordinators. And so part of our role is to facilitate your research. My background is in nursing, so I certainly haven't done a lot of research and writing proposals, but I've seen a lot. But we can help with budgeting, manage your grants once they're open, help you upload them, follow things through, check things, particularly at the university if you're from the distance. My portfolio at the moment is the external services, so up Northland, Counties Manukau, and Waikato, and I've been down to Waikato and counties and now come up here. So part of my role is to look after the external researchers and to help them as much as I can. And I mean, because I'm in Auckland, I can maybe tap into resources, and I think one of the things that's come through clearly is the mentoring that people are looking for. My notes are over there, so I can't actually access them.
So the opportunity really is, if you are going down the track of research projects, particularly funding, is to have a direct relationship with Sue. So the decision was made. 3/10 of Sue's role is actually for the external sites, for the sites other than Auckland, and that was an explicit decision to dedicate part of the senior part of this team to out of Auckland support. Now that's the good news. The bad news is there's also Waikato, Rotorua, Taranaki, and a few others. There's actually something like 7 sites. So nevertheless, in the scheme of things, this is absolutely a start towards providing explicit research support for that. And Sue's being a little bit modest. She's been doing research support for a long time, is actually at the senior level of this, and is a very valuable resource in that regard. Nick, I'm going to put something to you that I think I have the strong belief that it would be nice to have a more visible and explicit University of Auckland presence, if you like, here, which is more about, we fund now mostly through the buyback technique. You've heard that it's possible for us to put small fractional appointments into different people. What those do is they give you a direct contract to the University of Auckland, which means you can do anything that I can do within the University of Auckland pretty well. Some of which you might not want to do, because you might come under compliance requirements. But it does actually mean, for example, you could, for example, supervise PhD students. You do have to have a contract to do that. Now, in addition to that, we can actually make primary university appointments that have the flip model. That is, the clinical time is brought from the university by the hospital on an exactly equal contra arrangement. The deal is exactly mirrored. It's just the other way around. And in that way, we could start to develop a core of people that have a stronger affiliation with the university. Now, just a little red flags going up in my head that the Vice-Chancellor has been telling all of us very strongly that the university is in financial trouble. And so don't read this as a untapped box of unlimited resource. But actually it may not be about much new resource. It may be more about identifying people who want to do this and then finding a way in which we use our existing resource, or possibly a little more resource, to make a big difference to that presence. And those would be the people that would be at the centre of a hub. But first thing, of course, is it requires interest, and then the second thing, it requires us to work together to achieve that. So I just open that up to you to take that forward.
Yeah, well, I'm obviously happy, Alan, I quite like you, so I'm sure we can work something out. We're actually swimming in money, so no problem.
I was going to mention that point.
Unlike the Auckland University, obviously. There's a couple of observations I'd make. I think there's probably some sort of need for more an administrative role, or something that would be able to support people and just know the pathways and connect, almost a coordination type of function. I'm not sure what that looks like. I mean, I've just loved today. I've been here for most of the day, and the enthusiasm, which I knew was here anyway, has been amazing. There's obviously a couple of areas that I learnt about, such as the biostatistician superheroes that we've got within the organisation. I mean, I really did think that would be something we had almost no interest in, and yet there seems to be quite a lot, which is fantastic, because I think that's always a really scary area. But the other thing I've been really impressed with is the willingness of the university to be available for us. One of the questions I would have, and the challenge, is that we've got 500 really super smart people that possibly aren't in the room. I can't see any. I do see quite a number of nurses and doctors, but we've got allied health staff that are just wanting to be engaged in this as well, and have a huge amount to offer. And they are a key part of our future around multidisciplinary teams, the integrated health and social care model. And I know that, there's how we could, and I'm quite keen to see collaborations across institutes. But absolutely Auckland University is probably our biggest partner, and and I'm very aware of that. But we do have obviously North Tech, and we have AUT, and we've been in discussions before where we've been looking at postgraduate support and training centres, and so I guess I wonder about somewhere like AUT and whether they need support. I did get the message though that just because you're a nurse or an allied health clinician doesn't mean you have to approach a nurse or an allied health clinician or a doctor. There's a lot of cross opportunities too, so even linking our allied health into this process I think would be really good, because I know they will have a lot of great ideas in their research, and particularly that interdisciplinary research. I think that was my main observations. I do think we need to have some discussion and try and work out where or how we could support this more and make it easy. I was interested that I don't think anybody's talked about a big building that we need. I was going to get some fundraising for a really flashy new building, but if you don't want one, that's cool. No, seriously, I am keen to look at Shane Jones's Regional Development Fund as an opportunity. We're not sure where, because we've got some land challenges, and as you can see today, some car parking challenges, but that is something for the future. It's absolutely not necessary to make this happen, because it's all about people, but I do think a longer term vision around, with obviously a new hospital, but even potentially one before that, having somewhere we can provide postgraduate training and also research.
We do have the Taitokerau campus, just over.
Yep, no, I'm aware.
By Rust Ave.
Okay, not aware.
The University of Auckland have a Taitokerau campus just here.
Okay. Yeah. One of the things I'm really aware of is people are really busy, and being close, particularly if you're also offering postgrad training, lunchtimes, etc., is something that we could look at. And we've had a lot of discussion across all of the tertiary institutes around potential for something like that in the future. But what I was really encouraged was we don't need a building, we've got the people, and that's
all about the people.
Yeah.
What do you think? Key points that we...
I've just written 3 things down, and echoes a bit what Nick said. I think this is what I take away from today. There's a willingness from the organisation, there's a willingness from the people, and there's a willingness from the university. And that means that we can do something. And I think it's really interesting that we kind of all agree that the end point is going to be better outcomes for our patients. And that won't just be about the work we do, it'll be about the people we attract and enable, and the teams and the relationships that we build. Hopefully it'll be a cycle. And just in terms of the next step for us, and I'll just be surgery specific, we have an aspiration to be a provincial academic unit of surgery, and we can only do that as part of the University of Auckland or in collaboration with the University of Auckland. And I really think the next step for us is to take one of our junior researchers through to a higher degree with the help of Ian and John. And I think we can do that after today.
That would be a great project, and you can see that we have strong support from the academic department.
I don't have much more really to add. I think it's all been echoed quite well. I think the one thing that's been repeatedly said is that it needs central coordination, just so everyone's got a point that they can access whatever help they require.
Yeah, just to tautoko what everyone else has said, but also recognising that a lot of the specific issues that do affect tautokero need to have a strong equity focus, and that means that there need to be some really strong partnerships developed, with tangata whenua, and making sure that any research strategy involves tangata whenua.
I think that message is very strong. So I think it's an opportunity then for comments from the floor. Anybody who has some thoughts or questions. I think this is definitely a session in which suggestions are completely welcome, how we can advance this. Yeah.
The idea of a research hub with access to lots of information sounds very good. My concern is that the information will soon go out of date, and the enthusiasm to try and keep it up is a problem. And I would recommend that the connections, the channels are wide open, so that we who are heads of departments in the university do want to hear from them. So don't feel afraid just to write to us and say, yeah. And so if we fall down in not keeping the hub up to date, sorry in advance. I know with these things it's easy to start with enthusiasm and not quite get there. But don't let that put you off. Just give us a call or send us an email.
I would reiterate that.
I guess just to clarify, I was thinking about the hub as being people. I know I stay in a virtual world quite a lot of the time. I'm talking about people. And I would actually like to suggest that our statistical superheroes are the beginning of our research. If we added some statistical support to that, and then added, if we had
and I think we could find a person as a type of go-to person. That could be either, it would be possibly another 10th or something that we can find, that we can fund somebody that actually we could look at a partnership on this, and whether it's partly administrative that links in with Sue, or somebody, or both, that there's a core that at least they know who you go and talk to, and that person can then get to the heads. And, I'm sorry, when it is true the university is bureaucratic and doesn't always work perfectly, but I think actually the heads are mostly very willing to try and make it work. And I'm also willing to hear from people if things don't seem to be going well. So that would be the way to go. We have a...
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, I too visualise the hub as something on the internet site. But I was just hearing what people were saying about contacting with questions, and I was just thinking some transparency or about having a centralised place with contact details would be really helpful for the university, and people who to contact about honorary lectureships or statistical help or whatever.
Well, I think he's called Win. And that is Win's primary role, and Win will be part of the solution, just coordinating. Statistics. So I think I'd just like to acknowledge what a good job Win does actually in this, and that's very clearly what he's here for.
Another superhero.
Absolutely. We've got someone at the back.
Thank you. My only comment is please take along public health as well.
Yes, absolutely. So I have sitting here today, I've been thinking that Shane Jones is obviously someone that is one thing that we should be tapping into, but it really seems that we should be thinking about HRC and the opportunities here. We appear to have the opportunity to tick all the priority boxes, or to really meet the priorities, and that is sort of just looking at your list. You sit here thinking, well, Northland's got to be the place. Now, you need a few things for a successful HRC grant, but I think between the resources that are here and the resources that are in the university, that has to be a starter. And I would suggest that's a project we should probably think about how we could advance that as a concrete way of really making progress. So we'll need to think about who and what and how, but it's the sort of thing that can start from a conversation and an idea.
I'll just make a comment there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you got that one. This was
That one stretching.
I thought you used Shane too.
I'm aware too, and Shane, you might want to comment, I think you've given a grant to Northland fairly recently in the Moko Foundation and Wilkins research that's going on up in Kaitaia. So there's a little hub that's just opened up there around some research that's going to go on over the next 5 years, I believe.
Yeah, so they just received one of our
program grant.
Yeah, and I mean that was, I think it's
Fantastic.
it's 500k, so
Yeah, it's
it's a
fantastic.
significant amount of money over the 5 year period.
That sort of thing can make a really big difference, because once you've got that sort of funding, that pays some salaries and it gets some momentum, and then one thing leads to another, and that's the way to really get this accelerated. Have we still got a roving mic? Just at the back here.
Thank you, and I also work in paediatrics and child development team. One of the things that I found when I started doing my research was that other teams within the DHB had done similar research, and I only found out about it by accident, that people had been looking at reasons behind the DNAs in each team, pocket by pocket. And when I hear the word research hub, I think, surely there must be someone keeping an overview of the projects in the Northland DHB, and I don't know if that role is there, but I would like to see that. I think it would be really valuable.
Well, one way to do,
Sorry, I completely agree with what you're saying. And sort
So
of that.
can I answer that question? The Patient Safety Quality and Improvement Directorate, which is very ably run by Asia, has within it a role, a clinical audit manager, and Peter's still here. Thank you. So Peter actually does keep track of all of the audit work that's done within the DHB. She keeps track of the recommendations that come from the audits, and she chases people in the most diplomatic way imaginable to make sure that the recommendations have been followed up. And that, I think, is a real strength for our Quality Improvement Directorate. And I would like to think that the Research Hub will sit alongside that audit team and work together, because there are so many very obvious overlaps between all the required from the two groups.
But we could make that taitokido wide, so that, like, I could access that. You know, that, so actually, when we're kind of thinking about who's working in this space, often there's lots of things happening that we don't know. So if it's in a centralised place that anyone can access, then we can see what's going on and who's doing that work. Not just DHB or hospital-based research.
Yeah. My sense from what I've heard from the panel and from those in the room is that the research hub that I think we'll set up will have a presence on the internet as a website, and there will be a presence which will be a genuine source of information, and there will be somebody who clearly takes a responsibility to be a conduit between Northland and the University of Auckland, and either direct information themselves or pass on information to others as to where they should seek support. And then within the DHB, those people who have special skills and talents like the statisticians will be able to be available.
Fantastic. Now, the other thing, of course, is whether there should be, on a regular, possibly annual basis, a meeting where, firstly, we continue the conversation, but also where people present what they're doing, and that's part of the answer to knowing what people are doing, and it's also part of the answer to networking, because when you hear what people are doing, it inspires you to think of things, and also you may well find you want to work together. So if there's an interest in that, perhaps it's something, again, in partnership we could keep going, possibly in the first instance anyway. Comment there?
I'm just going off the partnership commitment. Is there any opportunity to explore working alongside our wānanga, like wānanga o Wainuiarangi, our Māori universities, as well as our mainstream?
I'm sure there's an opportunity. We need to just think about what that means. I certainly think that's something that we should look at.
There was a screen last year that brought together a whole bunch of research being done across Te Taitokoro Māori health research, and there was Te Wānanga, there was Massey, there was AUT, there were whole bunches of different researchers doing research across really wide areas, and that was really pretty impressive. We need to do more of that, yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're on time. So for the purpose of this session, I'd like you to all just join in thanking all the contributors to the panel. And that's the first thing. And then I'll just perhaps just close the meeting by just by saying thank you to people. I think probably the starting point of thanking is probably Wynne and Caroline, not only because they keep our part of this world running so very well, but because of the work that you've done and the idea of bringing this meeting today to fruition. And well done. I think that's been a very worthwhile initiative. It's taken us a little while, but I think it's been really great.
Thank you.
I think next probably, Nick, I'm enormously impressed that you've spent the day with us. I mean, to get your blessing and support at a quick, celebrity appearance would have been marvellous. But I really, it's so seldom that you actually see the person in leadership actually stay and listen and take an interest and be genuinely involved. So I just want to really acknowledge that and thank you. It's huge. Obviously, without naming each of them, all the people who've led sessions, coordinated, spoken and contributed in that way, thank you all. I think you've done an amazing job. I've seen some of the best facilitation. They say looking very close to me, but all of you have made a great contribution there, and thank you very, very much for that. And then again, probably without naming, but I will just thank all my colleagues from the University of Auckland. It's a good contingent. Quite a number of you have come. You've taken your life in your hands and risked that terribly dangerous journey. And we're just Aucklanders. We're not rugged Northlanders. So this is quite a thing to do. But thank you all. I really do. I really appreciate it because it's flying the flag and advancing the cause. And thank you very much for that. And then finally, all of you who've come and participated, because you've been just fantastic in that participation. And I'm being reminded also to thank Mike Roberts for his keeping us to time and for his role in coordinating it. But really, I think the participation of everybody today has been great, and it's quite inspirational because I think that the key to this actually is the enthusiasm of the people. If you want to do this, we can, and we'd love to work with you to do it. And there's no mileage in pushing people down this track. It's something you need to want to do, and I think what's come across to me today is the enthusiasm. So on that note, he hui pai, he kōrero pai, ko te manui, ka mutu pai. Hoki pai atu ki te kāinga, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.